Good day, my name is Sean Moore, and thank you for tuning into this video. Obviously, you will be aware that the updated FMS was released recently with a cutting edge, and included in it was the explanation of a new pre-harvest infestation monitoring protocol. A number of questions have arisen since the release of the updated FMS, and I wanted to address those here, as it is extremely important that there is absolute clarity on what needs to be done. So I'll start by way of background with a feedback of the performance of the FMS over the last 4 years, and particularly last year. Last year was the 4th year of implementation of the FMS. In the first year, there were 9 reported interceptions of live FCM in Europe. In the second year, 19, the third year, 14, and last year, which was the 4th year, 15. These were reported in soft citrus, navels, valencias, and grapefruit, and from the Eastern and Western Cape and Limpopo. Interceptions were reported right through the season from May until October, and from all 3 ports from which exports were shipped to Europe. Interceptions were also reported from a range of production regions throughout South Africa. And these were reported in the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, and Denmark, and from both option A and option C exported fruit, which were shipped under a range of different regimes from 2 degrees to 0 degrees to -1 degree. We interrogated all 15 of the interceptions last season, as we have done for the last 4 years, and what was conspicuous was that in only one of these cases was there any report of a pre-harvest finding of FCM infestation in the orchard, and only 1 post-harvest. Our main interest here, as we're speaking to the pre-harvest FCM infestation monitoring protocol, is the pre-harvest FCM infestation. And this reflected a similar trend to the previous seasons, and consequently it became clear to us that modification of this pre-harvest monitoring protocol is necessary. So we conducted a large-scale field trial in order to do this. We selected 10 orchards with a notable infestation of FCM. We divided the 10 orchards into quadrats and placed a 5-tree data set into each quadrat. And then every week for 11 weeks, we picked up every single fallen fruit in every single orchard, including and separately those under the data trees. Ultimately, we had to reduce the number of orchards to 7, as it simply became an unmanageably large process. And in total, we cut up 55,000 fruits over 11 weeks. This graph shows the infestation from those 7 orchards in the orchard as a whole, in other words, having cut up every single fruit, and this is in the red for each orchard, and in the green is the infestation in each of the 5 data sets, 5-tree data sets in each orchard. And you can notice, even without analyzing, that in the overwhelming majority of cases, infestation in the 5-tree data sets was higher than that in the orchard as a whole. In fact, where the infestation in the orchard exceeded the threshold, which I will mention a little more on later, in none of the cases was this not detected in any one of the 5 set data trees. And infestation in the orchard as under the 5 data trees, on average, overestimated the infestation in the orchard as a whole by almost 2-fold. So there was no problem with the system, but only clearly the implementation of it. And I think the problem is that it is just too difficult to ensure that the team that is conducting sanitation does not pick up the fruit under the data trees. So In the change to the FMS, we state that orchard monitoring entails destructive inspection of a sample of fruit from the sanitation fruit from each orchard, from the sanitized fruit from each orchard every 2 weeks. And we go into detail in the appendix. So as with previous seasons, all of the fruit that is being inspected must be cut. And then monitoring should preferably be conducted on the same day every 2nd week. So instead of weekly, monitoring is now only conducted every 2nd week, but we understand that it is not always possible to conduct the monitoring for a particular orchard on the same day each fortnight. So, but there must not be more than 18 days gap between 2 monitoring events for an orchard, and for a 12-week monitoring period, no less than 6 monitoring records are required. So previously, it was also a 12-week monitoring period, but weekly and no less than 12 monitoring records per orchard. The recommendation to initiate monitoring 16 weeks before harvest, before the projected harvest date, still remains in place, even though it is only mandatory to conduct it for a 12-week period. This is because the harvesting date can change from what is projected. If recorded infestation is more than an average of 0.1 infested fruit per tree per week, so the threshold value has changed now to more than 0.1 infested fruit per tree per week. If this is surpassed during the 12 weeks leading up to harvest, up to 4 weeks before harvest, then it is mandatory for a corrective treatment to be applied as listed in the drop-down menu on Fight Clean. If this threshold is surpassed during the last 4 weeks before harvest, then the orchard, as with previously, would default to having to be exported only under option C. Bear in mind that an orchard cannot be disqualified for export to Europe based on infestation levels in the orchard. Only at post-harvest inspections at the pack house can the orchard ever be disqualified for export to Europe. The threshold of 0.1 is appropriate, as you may remember that the initial threshold that was used when the FMS was launched 4 years ago was no more than 0.2 infested fruit per tree per week. It was only changed to no more than 0 infested fruit per tree per week because we realized that there was an issue with pre-harvest monitoring and there continued to be interceptions in Europe. However, now that we know that there is a relationship of approximately 2 to 1 between infestation under the data trees and infestation in the orchard as a whole, we believe that a threshold of 0.1 infested fruit per tree per week is an appropriate threshold. Selection of samples and destructive inspection of samples must be conducted by trained personnel as within the past. So this means that the previously given training is now redundant because that pertained to a system that no longer exists. So all personnel must be retrained now. The very good video produced by the Citrus Academy is still available, but bear in mind that the portion on pre-harvest monitoring is now no longer correct. So the farm must provide this training themselves or from a consultant. The 5 data tree monitoring system may still be used, but it is not the official system and the results must not be uploaded onto Fight Clean. We don't necessarily recommend that this is done at all, but if a particular farm wishes to maintain the system, they may do so. In the appendix of the FMS explaining the pre-harvest infestation monitoring system, we have the following: conducted once every 2 weeks. All sanitation fruit from an orchard should be pooled on each occasion. We don't make this mandatory because we realize that it may be difficult in a very large orchard, but we advise that the fruit should be pooled. The total number of fruit collected per orchard must be counted or calculated or estimated and recorded only when the monitoring is done. So there will be a number of orchard sanitation events that happen from which no monitoring sample will be taken, as monitoring is only conducted every 2 weeks, but only when the monitoring sample is going to be taken on that occasion must the total number of fruit collected per orchard be counted or calculated. When I say calculated, I mean that if, for example, in this case, 5 bags of fruit are picked up from a particular orchard on one particular day, only the fruit in one of those bags needs to be counted, and this can then be multiplied by 5 to get a sufficiently accurate estimation of the number of fruit that has fallen. Or use can be made of a scale. If fruit are picked up in bags, then the fruit can be weighed with a hanging scale, or if it's picked up in crates, it can be weighed on a flat scale. So start by weighing a small number of fruit in order to determine the weight of a single fruit. Once you have this weight, weigh all of the bags or the crates and divide this by the average number of a fruit to estimate the total number of fruit per orchard. Record the date of the previous orchard sanitation event, even if no sample was taken for inspection from this previous sanitation. Sanitation, it's mandatory for sanitation to be conducted at least once a week. So this sanitation event could have happened a week ago, or if sanitation is conducted continuously on a farm, it could even have happened as recently as a day or 2 ago. That is fine. Then randomly take a 100 fruit sample for analysis from each orchard from the sanitation fruit. This is independent of orchard size. For small and for large orchards, only a 100 fruit sample. If fewer than 100 sanitation fruit are picked up, then all fruit must be sampled. So if, for example, on that particular day, there were only 50 fallen fruit in the orchard as a whole, that the entire 50 fruit sample must be cut instead of a 100 fruit sample. Fruit must be selected for sampling from the sanitation fruit randomly. And by that, we mean there must be no bias for or against any fruit based on their appearance, either fruit that appear more or less likely to be infested. Select and also select the fruit sample from fruit collected from throughout the orchard. This is why we recommend pooling of the fruit, but if fruit are not pooled, then one must walk around the orchard or drive around the orchard, taking samples from all of the piles or the bags of fruit until one has made up the 100 fruit sample. All fruit must be dissected or must be cut as in the past, and a fruit will be recorded as being alive if a larva is found in the fruit, whether alive or dead, or if there are signs that there was a larva in the fruit and it has already exited. This must be done on the same day that sanitation is conducted, so that sanitation fruit can be removed and destroyed immediately thereafter. The following information must be entered into Fight Clean on each occasion: the date of the previous sanitation event, even if a sample was not taken to monitor FCM infestation on that previous event, the total number of fruit collected per orchard, and the total number of fruit in the sample that were infested with FCM. When the orchard was registered, you would also have entered the total number of trees in the orchard, which will enable Fight Clean to conduct the calculation and provide an infestation level per tree per week. And Fight Clean will then also inform you if you have surpassed the threshold of 0.1 infested fruit per tree per week, and therefore whether a corrective treatment is required, or if during the last 4 weeks before harvest, that orchard defaults to option C. Just to give you some information on how we calculated that sample size, what we did is we collected all of the fruit that had fallen on every occasion from every single orchard. This thus gave us in total 63 data sets, 63 orchard weeks of data. And in this particular example that I'm showing you, we had 853 fruit that dropped during that week in that orchard. We calculated the infestation in that orchard, which was an average of 0.17 infested fruit per tree per week. And then we determined the point at which the infestation was sufficiently similar to 2 decimal places, I believe it was, to the infestation in the orchard as a whole. And on average, the average sample size at which point infestation was the same as for the whole orchard was 116. And for the FMS, we have rounded this off to 100 fruit, a 100 fruit sample per orchard on each occasion. I have also been asked why orchard size does not influence sample size. We used a statistical formula for calculating the appropriate sample size based on population. And we did this both for a 1 hectare orchard and a 20 hectare orchard. And the sample size determined for a 1 hectare orchard was 384.1602 fruit, and for a 20 hectare orchard, 384.1600 fruit. So therefore, no real difference. So you may then ask, well, if we calculated that a sample of 384 fruit is required, is a sample size of 100 fruit okay? Well, if the sample was 384, our margin of error would be 5%. In other words, if we use our threshold of 0.1 infested fruit per tree per week, this could actually be anything between 0.095 and 0.105 infested fruit. But by reducing our sample size to 100, we simply introduce a 10% margin of error, which means that if we use again our threshold of 0.1 infested fruit per tree per week, infestation could actually be anything between 0.09 and 0.11 infested fruit, so still sufficiently accurate. Random sampling is recommended and is important, but we did also determine how important it was because we have received a number of questions about the importance of random sampling and whether the portion of the orchard from which one takes the sample could have a serious influence on the outcome if the recommendation to follow random sampling is not properly followed. So the total number, on each occasion, the total number of fruit evaluated per orchard was divided into 100 fruit samples. For each orchard on each occasion, we had an average of 7.5 100 fruit samples and a maximum of 17, and infestation was compared between these 100 fruit samples in each orchard on each occasion. And the average standard error between 100 fruit samples within orchards was 0.02 infested fruit per tree. So a very small standard error, as small as 1/5 of our threshold, which is 0.1. And where a threshold of 0.1 infested fruit per tree was surpassed in the orchard, only 17% of samples, of 100 fruit samples, showed lower than this, and only 7% of first samples taken showed lower than this. Therefore, infestation in sanitation fruit was fairly homogeneous, and although sampling must be done randomly, non-random sampling will not crash the system. Please read the revised FMS and the cutting edge 331 carefully. And if you have any questions, I believe that there will be a Q&A entry facility after this video where you can ask questions. I believe that the video will remain up for a few weeks, and I will visit the Q&A session periodically to see what questions need to be answered. Thereafter, if you still have questions, please contact your extension manager, or you can contact me. Thank you very much.